Kummersdorf Proving Ground, Germany, November 4, 1943. A cold, metallic grey hangs over the testing range. The air is still, thick with the scent of damp earth and diesel. A small group of men stands clustered on a reviewing platform, officers in field grey, engineers in dark suits. Their breath forms small clouds in the chill. All eyes are fixed on a gargantuan shape, shrouded beneath a canvas tarpaulin. A signal is given. With a low, grinding shriek of steel tracks on concrete, the shape begins to move. The tarpaulin is pulled away. What emerges is not merely a tank, it is a moving fortress, a steel cliff. Its tracks are nearly 4 feet wide. Its hull, a slab of hardened armor, sits so low to the ground it seems to be carved from the earth itself. Atop it, a turret of staggering proportions mounts a 12.8 cm KWK-44 gun, a naval weapon transplanted onto a land vehicle. This is the Porsche Type 205, Project 205, the Maus. The prototype vehicle V1 lumbers forward at a walking pace. The ground trembles. The watching officers feel the vibration through their boots. There is no cheering, only a profound, uneasy silence. The machine is awe-inspiring, a manifestation of pure industrial will, but in that silent tremor lies an unspoken truth. The engineers know it. The more pragmatic officers sense it. This is not the future of warfare. This is its tombstone, made manifest in 188 tons of steel. By the winter of 1942, the character of the war had fundamentally shifted for Nazi Germany. The heady, victorious days of the Blitzkrieg were a fading memory. In the east, the Wehrmacht was shattered at Stalingrad, its Sixth Army annihilated. The initiative had been ripped from German hands. This was no longer a war of rapid maneuver and dazzling encirclements. It had become a brutal war of attrition, a grinding contest of industrial production, raw materials, and manpower. A contest Germany was ill-equipped to win against the combined might of the Soviet Union, the British Empire, and the rising industrial colossus of the United States. Within the Wolf's Lair, Hitler's headquarters in East Prussia, a corresponding psychological shift was taking place. The Führer's trust in his professional general staff, never strong, evaporated entirely. He saw their caution as cowardice, their strategic assessments as defeatism. He began to bypass them, seeking solutions not in grand strategy or operational flexibility, but in singular, revolutionary technology. He became obsessed with the concept of the Wunderwaffe, the wonder weapon. These were not merely new tools of war. In Hitler's mind, they were talismans. A single, war-winning miracle that could reverse the tides of fortune, restore psychological supremacy, and negate the enemy's overwhelming numerical and material advantages. The V-2 rocket, the Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighter, the Type XXI U-boat, all were born from this desperate alchemy of genius and delusion. And the ultimate expression of this philosophy, the most literal and heavy-handed symbol of an unbreakable will, was to be a tank. Not just a better tank, but an invincible one. A tank so large, so heavily armored, so overwhelmingly armed that no Allied gun could destroy it, and no defensive line could withstand it. It would be a psychological weapon as much as a military one, a monster to haunt the dreams of his enemies. In July 1942, he summoned Ferdinand Porsche, the famed automotive designer and a personal favorite, and gave him the directive: begin design work on a super-heavy breakthrough tank of unprecedented scale. The specifications handed to Ferdinand Porsche were not born from a tactical requirement of the panzer divisions. They were an edict from a dream. Hitler demanded a vehicle with a minimum of 200 mm of frontal armor, effectively impervious to any known anti-tank gun of the era. Its main armament was to be the monstrous 12.8 cm gun, capable of destroying any Allied tank from a safe distance, with a secondary 7.5 cm gun coaxial in the turret for softer targets. Speed was secondary, survivability and firepower were everything. Porsche, an engineering visionary, but one prone to complex and resource-intensive solutions, embraced the challenge. His design, the Maus, was a sarcastic code name that stuck. It was an exercise in extremes. To carry the estimated 200 tons of weight, the tank required a revolutionary electric drive system. A massive Daimler-Benz aircraft engine would act not to power the tracks directly, but to generate electricity for twin electric motors driving each sprocket. This promised superior torque and control, but added immense complexity, weight, and required scarce materials like copper. The armor scheme was all-enveloping. Even the belly plating was 100 m thick to withstand mine blasts. From the very beginning, the project was mired in a fundamental conflict of realities. The German Army Weapons Office, the Heereswaffenamt, was struggling to keep the existing Panzer IV, Panther, and Tiger production lines supplied with raw materials and skilled labor. They saw Porsche's Colossus as a dangerous fantasy. Their own parallel super-heavy project, the Lion, had already been scaled back into what would become the Tiger II. Yet Hitler's personal backing of Porsche was absolute. The first prototype order was placed in March 1943, not with the weapons office's blessing, but over their muted objections. The Maus was not a weapon designed for the battlefield. It was a monument commissioned by a dictator, built to the scale of his deteriorating psyche, and its very existence would expose the fatal cracks in the Reich's war machine. The lumbering prototype at Kummersdorf was therefore a Pyrrhic victory. It proved the concept could be made into cold, hard steel, but it also signaled the point of no return, where Germany's technical ingenuity was no longer serving a viable strategy, but was instead being consumed by it. The stage was now set for the collision between this fanatical dream and the unyielding laws of physics, economics, and war. For Adolf Hitler, the Maus was more than a tank. It was a physical manifestation of National Socialist will, the triumph of ideology over material constraints. In his cramped situation conferences, surrounded by maps showing shrinking fronts, the Maus represented a singular, unbreakable point. He fantasized about entire battalions of them, smashing through Soviet lines like an iron tidal wave, unstoppable and demoralizing. It was a weapon meant to restore the shock and awe of the early war, to bring back the blitzkrieg through sheer, overwhelming mass. In his mind, it addressed the core problem of 1943, allied quantitative superiority. If one Maus was worth 50 T-34s, then the equation of war could be rewritten. This was magical thinking, a desperate retreat into a realm where psychological impact and symbolic power outweighed tactical utility. For Ferdinand Porsche and his team, the Maus was the ultimate engineering puzzle, but every solution created two new problems. The electric drive was brilliant in theory, but a logistical horror. It demanded tons of copper for generators and motors, copper that was desperately needed for electrical systems across the war economy. The tank's width, necessary for stability, exceeded the loading gauge of European railways. It would have to be transporting in sections on special freight cars, a process taking days to disassemble and reassemble near the front. Its ground pressure, despite the wide tracks, was still immense, condemning it to roads and open plains, not the muddy Rasputitsa of the Eastern Front. Every subsystem, from the hydraulically traversed turret weighing over 50 tons to the need for a snorkel system to ford deep rivers, pushed 1940s technology to its absolute breaking point. They were building a machine at the very edge of the possible, for a purpose that was rapidly becoming impossible. Within the Oberkommando des Heers, OKH, the Army High Command, the Maus was viewed with a mixture of dread and contempt. Veteran panzer commanders like Heinz Guderian, now inspector of panzer troops, understood mobile warfare. They needed reliable, repairable tanks like the Panther in sufficient numbers. The Maus was the antithesis of this. It was a siege engine, a weapon for static war Germany could not afford to fight. Its fuel consumption, estimated at over 350 liters per hour on roads, was catastrophic in a Reich already rationing synthetic fuel. To commit a Maus to battle was to tether an entire fuel convoy and a battalion of recovery vehicles to it. Officers saw it not as a weapon, but as a resource black hole and a tactical liability. Yet, under Hitler's dictatorship, outright opposition was suicidal. Their resistance was passive, delaying paperwork, emphasizing production crises for existing tanks, and hoping the project would collapse under its own weight before it could drain the lifeblood from their already anemic panzer divisions. True cost of the Maus can be measured in the alternatives Germany sacrificed. The steel consumed to build one complete Maus, approximately 180 metric tons of high-quality armor plate, could have produced 4 Panther tanks or over 20 Sturmgeschütz IAI assault guns, the workhorses of the infantry support role. The specialized machining required for its gigantic components tied up precious tooling and skilled technicians for months, creating bottlenecks in other vital programs. Its Daimler-Benz MB 509 V12 engine, derived from an aircraft powerplant, was a masterpiece that belonged in a fighter or bomber, not ground-bound in a fuel-guzzling behemoth. In a war where Germany was being systematically starved of resources by blockade and strategic bombing, the Maus was not just inefficient. It was an act of industrial self-sabotage, diverting a disproportionate share of a shrinking pie into a single, grotesque dessert. On a hypothetical battlefield, the Maus faced insurmountable practical hurdles. No European bridge could support its weight. It would have to ford every river using its snorkel system, a slow, vulnerable procedure turning it into a stationary target. The railway transport issue meant it could not be rapidly deployed to crisis points. Its movement to the front would be a slow, conspicuous logistical odyssey. Once there, its operational range was cripplingly short. Its massive size made it impossible to conceal, a magnet for enemy artillery and aerial attention. In urban combat, it would be a death trap, its long gun useless in close quarters, its blind spots vast. It was a weapon designed for a war of open fields and predictable fronts, a war that had already vanished by 1944, replaced by a desperate, fluid defense where mobility and flexibility were the only currencies of survival. While German engineers labored on their steel giant, Allied intelligence gradually became aware of the project through intercepted communications and reconnaissance. The reaction was not panic, but analytical curiosity. Western Allied tank doctrine, influenced by American industrial pragmatism, emphasized reliability, numbers, and strategic mobility. The Soviet response was even more telling. They did not embark on a crash program to build a rival supertank. Instead, they continued to mass-produce the effective T-3485 and developed heavy tank destroyers like the ISU-152, capable of delivering a devastating blow. More significantly, the Allies held an uncontested trump card: absolute air superiority. By 1944, the skies over Europe belonged to Allied fighter bombers. A vehicle like the Maus, slow, unmistakable, and reliant on long supply lines, would have been a prime target for P-47 Thunderbolts armed with rockets and bombs. Its greatest enemy would not have been a rival tank, but a pilot it could never hope to engage. The project was a solution to the warfare of 1940, blind to the brutal realities of 1944. These converging angles, the dream, the engineering struggle, the strategic descent, the resource drain, the tactical folly, and the evolving enemy counter, formed a cage of realities. The Maus was trapped long before it ever left the proving ground. The climax would not be a dramatic battlefield test, but the slow, grinding collision of this trapped project with the collapse of the Reich itself. The turning point for the Maus, and for all of Hitler's Wunderwaffe dreams, was not a single event, but the simultaneous collapse of multiple fronts in the summer of 1944. On June 6, the Western Allies secured a foothold in Normandy. On June 22, the Soviets launched Operation Bagration, an offensive of apocalyptic scale that annihilated Army Group Center. Germany was now fighting a true two-front war of movement, and it was losing catastrophically. The very concept of a front line became fluid, rendering a slow, short-range breakthrough vehicle utterly obsolete. Concurrently, the Allied strategic bombing campaign reached a murderous crescendo. Synthetic fuel plants, like the vast complex at Luna, were pounded into rubble. By September 1944, German aviation fuel production was a fraction of its former self, grounding the Luftwaffe and crippling training. The Maus, a fuel-hungry prototype, now faced an existential threat more fundamental than enemy guns. It had nothing to drink. The bombing also shattered transportation networks and hammered the specialized factories involved in the Maus project. The Krupp works in Essen, tasked with producing the armored hulls and turrets, lay under a constant rain of high explosives. The two completed prototypes, the V1 with a simulated turret weight and the V2 with its fully armed turret, were evacuated from the vulnerable Kummersdorf testing grounds, but they were not sent to a front. There was no front stable enough to receive them. Instead, they were shipped to the Panzerkraftwagen und Ausbildungsplatz at Böblingen and later to the massive, fortified underground factory complex at the Eisenwerk Wenzel in St. Valentin, Austria. This was not a deployment, it was a retreat into storage. The Maus was now a liability to be hidden, not a weapon to be unleashed. The dream of battalions of super-heavy tanks was dead. The grim reality was the struggle to protect two white elephants from being destroyed on their own soil before they could ever fire a shot in anger. The formal death warrant for the Maus project was signed not with a bang, but with a bureaucratic whisper. In late 1944, with the Ardennes offensive, Germany's last major gamble in the West, consuming every drop of fuel and scrap of armored reserves, the Supreme Command finally acknowledged the impossible. An order from the Heereswaffenamt officially cancelled all further work on the Maus. The dream of mass production was abandoned. The resources, what little remained, were to be redirected to last-ditch defensive weapons like the Volkssturm's Panzerfaust. The two existing prototypes were to be safeguarded, but their purpose was now ambiguous. They were no longer weapons of war. They were trophies, secrets, or perhaps simply problems for another day. That day came with terrifying speed in the spring of 1945. As the Red Army stormed into Austria from the east, the personnel at the St. Valentin facility received terse, final orders. The prototypes, particularly the completed V2 vehicle at the nearby Panzertruppenschule Armor School at Böblingen, could not be allowed to fall into Soviet hands intact. In early April 1945, as American forces also advanced into the region, a German demolition team arrived at the Böblingen site. What followed was not a clean execution, but a botched, hasty destruction. The V2 Maus was driven to a secluded area. Explosive charges were placed in its hull, and its mighty 12.8 cm gun was loaded with a single final shell, a hollow charge round designed to focus explosive energy. The gun was fired into its own engine compartment. The internal explosion tore through the vehicle, rupturing fuel lines and igniting a fierce fire that burned for hours. The ammunition inside cooked off in secondary explosions. When the flames died, the world's most powerful tank was a blackened, twisted hulk, its armor cracked and peeled open from the inside. The V1 prototype, lacking its turret, suffered a similar fate elsewhere, its hull blasted and rendered useless. This act of self-destruction is the true, ignominious climax of the Maus story. It was never killed in battle. It was euthanized by its own creators to prevent capture, a final admission that its only remaining value was as a denied prize. The moment of its abandonment was not a single date on a document, but this violent, scuttling act, the ultimate proof that the supertank had no place in the reality of the war its creator had unleashed. It died not on a battlefield, but in a field, a monstrous secret turned into a pile of still-warm scrap. The charred, silent carcasses did not remain hidden for long. In the chaotic days following the German surrender in May 1945, Allied technical intelligence teams, particularly the British and Soviets, fanned out across the Reich with one mission: to find and evaluate every piece of German military technology. The British discovered the gutted V2 hull at Böblingen. The Soviets, pushing into Austria, found the remains of the V1 hull and, more significantly, the second Maus turret, the one intended for the V1, sitting abandoned at the Krupp factory in Essen. What they found was a source of profound curiosity and tactical confirmation. British and American engineers clambered over the wreckage, taking measurements and photographs. Their reports, once classified, express a mixture of technical admiration and tactical bewilderment. They noted the incredible thickness of the armor, the sophistication of the electric drive components, the sheer audacity of the design. But their conclusions were unanimous. The vehicle was a strategic dead end. It was mechanically overcomplicated, logistically untenable, and tactically obsolete. It confirmed their own doctrinal choices towards reliability, air support, and mass production. For the Soviets, the discovery held different lessons. Ever pragmatic, they saw an opportunity. In 1946, a special recovery team was dispatched. In a remarkable feat of engineering, they combined the less damaged V2 hull from Böblingen with the unused turret from Essen. This hybrid Maus, a German monster assembled by Russian hands, was loaded onto a specially reinforced railcar and shipped to the USSR. It was taken to the Red Army's secret tank testing grounds at Kubinka outside Moscow. There, it was subjected to intense scrutiny, ballistic tests against its legendary armor, mechanical evaluations, and thorough dissection. It was not reverse-engineered, for the Soviets had no use for such a design. It was studied as a relic of a defeated enemy's flawed thinking, a steel monument to German hubris and strategic failure. The ledger of the Maus project, when finally tallied, reveals a staggering account of waste. The direct financial cost is estimated in the tens of millions of Reichsmarks, a precise figure lost to the chaos of defeat, but enough to fund an entire brigade of more effective vehicles. Yet the true audit must be measured in opportunity cost. The thousands of skilled man-hours spent machining unique components for 2 prototypes, hours that could have been spent building engines for Panthers or final drives for Tiger IIs. It is measured in the 400,000 kilograms of high-quality nickel-steel alloy, a critical, scarce resource, that was shaped into the 2 hulls and turrets, steel that could have produced armor-piercing cores for tens of thousands of shells, or hardened plates for dozens of jagged Panthers. The human cost is etched in the memories of those who worked on it. Albert Speer, Reich Minister of Armaments, would later write in his memoirs of the Maus as a prime example of Hitler's disastrous interference, a technological whim that drained strength from essential programs. Ferdinand Porsche's own son, Ferry, recalled the immense technical pressure and the gnawing awareness of its impracticality. Frontline panzer commanders, when interrogated after the war, expressed uniform disdain. They spoke of the chronic shortages of spare parts for their existing tanks, the desperate need for fuel, and the absurdity of a weapon that could not reach the battlefield. Most damningly, the Maus stands as the ultimate symbol of the Third Reich's late-war economic and strategic insanity. While German soldiers on the Eastern Front fought without winter clothing and factories operated under blackouts due to fuel shortages, a portion of the Reich's finest engineering talent and most precious materials was devoted to building a vehicle that solved none of their immediate, fatal problems. It was a luxury item in a total war of attrition. A psychological crutch for a leadership that could no longer face strategic reality. Its abandonment was not a choice, but the inevitable consequence of a system that prioritized monumental symbols over material needs. The Maus did not fail because it was poorly engineered. It failed because it was a perfect solution to a war that Hitler wished he was fighting, not the one he was losing. The hybrid Maus at Kubinka still exists today. It sits in the museum, silent and immense. Visitors walk around it, a testament not to German engineering prowess, but to its tragic misapplication. It is a relic that does not inspire awe for what it was, but sober reflection on the cost of what it represented. The story of the Maus is not merely a footnote in the history of armored warfare. It is a profound case study in the corruption of technological progress by ideology and desperation. It represents the moment when innovation ceased to serve strategy and instead became an escape from it. In the end, Hitler did not abandon his super tank in the sense of a reasoned strategic reversal. The project was torn from his grasp by the unyielding laws of reality, of physics, of logistics, of economics, and of time. Its cancellation was the final, forced acknowledgement that willpower alone could not bend the material world to its liking. The Maus was the ultimate expression of a regime that believed in monolithic, overwhelming solutions. But the war had evolved into a complex, fluid, and total struggle, where adaptability, numbers, and combined arms triumphed over isolated behemoths. The legacy of the Maus is a warning that echoes beyond the confines of World War II. It is a lesson about the seductive danger of technological silver bullets, the folly of building weapons for the wars of the past, and the catastrophic cost of subjugating practical needs to grandiose dreams. The tank itself was a marvel of engineering, a testament to human ingenuity. But placed in the service of a failing strategy and a fanatical vision, that ingenuity was not just wasted, it was turned against itself, consuming the very resources needed for survival. Today, the silent, assembled Maus in the Kubinka Museum serves as the perfect monument. It is not a symbol of what Germany could achieve, but of what it chose to prioritize at its moment of crisis. It stands not as a fearsome weapon of war, but as a colossal, steel question mark, a permanent reflection on the fine line between ambition and delusion, and the terrible price paid when that line is crossed.